trillion. That's a very large number. That's a 40 with 12 zeros behind it. So what am I talking about? What's 40 trillion? 40 trillion is the number of microbes or microorganisms that live in and on your body. So collectively, we refer to all of these microbes that each and every one of us carry around with us every single day. We refer to this as the human microbiome. So what do I mean by microbes? I mean bacteria, viruses, yeast and fungi, and also something called a bacteriophage. This is a virus that infects bacteria. So even our microbiome has a microbiome. This microbiome is very, very important for our health. But let's just put the number in perspective. So you, as a human being, have only 30 trillion cells. So that means that the number of cells in your body, more than half of the cells in your body are microbial cells. So are you actually more microbe than man? Or can we say you're less than human? Well, I don't think so. I think a better way to look at it is that together, microbes plus human makes us a superorganism. It doesn't make us less human. It makes us a better human. And that is because microbes make us stronger. Why do we think that microbes make us stronger? We know that now from many years of research over the past 10 years because we realize that the microbes have incredibly important functions for our health. So one thing that they do is our microbes in our gut, they help us to digest food. So they increase our metabolic capacity because they digest food components that we are unable to digest. Our microbes also can synthesize essential vitamins that we need for life, that we cannot synthesize for ourselves. These microbes also protect us from infections by pathogenic microorganisms. These microbes take up the niche, they take up the space where these pathogens would like to live, and they prevent them from infecting us. And one thing that I find of really utmost importance, because I'm an immunologist, is that our microbes, the human microbiome, is absolutely critical for the training and the education of our immune system. And this is something that I'm going to go back to several times during this talk, is to try to really help you to understand how these bugs are so important for our health. So this microbiome has even been referred to as the forgotten organ. So we really should not maybe think about these microbes as being something foreign to our body. We almost need to start thinking them as part of ourself, because you are never without these microbial partners your entire life. And in fact, they function like an organ. So just like your heart or your liver or your brain, this organ is really essential for your health. And if you damage this organ, then your health is going to suffer. So why do I say it was the forgotten organ? We knew that we had these microorganisms living on us. We've known this for quite some time, but we really ignored them because we thought, well, they're not really part of our body. We carry them around, but they're just sort of passengers, and they don't really influence our health. But something made us remember these microbes. And what is that? And that is something that we have to look back over the last 50 years. So something alarming has been happening to the health of our populations and our people in developed countries. And what's been happening is that we've been having an epidemic rise in chronic inflammatory diseases. So in this graph, what I'm showing you is that since about 1960, we've had a huge, huge increase in these types of immune-mediated diseases. So for example, allergic diseases, so allergies and asthma, have been increasing at an alarming rate. But also autoimmune diseases, such as type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, they've also been increasing at an alarming rate. Also inflammatory diseases like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, so inflammation in the gut, have been hugely increasing. And also, one really alarming study has shown that anaphylaxis, or a severe allergic reaction to food in preschool children, has increased at this epidemic proportion only in the last 20 years. So something is happening in our world. And it's not just these diseases. In fact, if you look at any single chronic inflammatory disease, it's been increasing at these epidemic proportions. So cardiac diseases have been increasing. Metabolic disorders like type 2 diabetes and obesity has been increasing. And even neurologic diseases like autism have been increasing. In fact, autism has increased 600% in only the past 20 years. That's absolutely alarming. And so we have to think about what has happened in 50 years to drive such a massive increase in these inflammatory diseases. So these diseases, or most diseases, are a result of an interaction between our genes and our environment. We know that most of these diseases have a genetic component, but even if you look at genetically identical twins, these twins have the exact genetic DNA. But if one of these twins has type 1 diabetes, the risk or the chance for the second genetically identical twin to get it is less than 50%. So even the same genes do not mean that you will automatically get that disease, because your environment plays a huge role in whether you will develop a disease or whether you will be protected from it. So this is an illustration of the importance of environment in disease pathogenesis. And also, if we look at the time frame, 50 years of this increase in diseases, our genetic component, our genetic makeup cannot change in 50 years. That's just way too short of a time period to have these genetic changes. And that really tells us that something has happened in our environment. So let's look at our environment. I'm sure all of you can imagine many, many things that we could say have changed in our environment in 50 years. So I'm going to give you a few examples. About 50 years ago, or 40 years ago, 2 years ago when I was a child, we played in the dirt. We played in the mud. We really were outside a lot. I got very dirty a lot. And if we look at now what happens in our societies, our lifestyle has changed so much, and we've become really obsessed with hygiene. And we really make sure that everybody is very, very clean. Our babies, we excessively bathe our babies. They're not getting dirty, but we're still bathing them. Go to the supermarket and look on the shelf. How many antibacterial soaps can you purchase? We're very, very obsessed with hygiene in our world. What about where we live? 50 years ago or longer, we had way more families that lived in rural communities or on a family farm. So in the 1900s, only 13% of the world's population lived in an urban setting. By 1950, there was 30% of the world's population lived in a city. It's estimated that by 2050, 70% at least of the world's population will live in a city. This can imply many, many different things, but it's really illustrating a change in lifestyle and a movement away from the farm and a movement away from interaction with livestock. One thing about developed countries is that actually developing countries are having greater urbanization than we have had in developed countries. And if you look at these increase in chronic inflammatory diseases, we've seen this increase happening over the past 50 years. What's really alarming now, if you look at developing countries, they are now also starting to see this massive epidemic increase in chronic diseases. They're just starting it at a later time point than we are. And they have even higher urbanization rates than we do. And the other thing about these increasing chronic diseases is not even just that the epidemic rise in them, is that the people that are becoming afflicted by these diseases, it's happening at a younger and a younger age. So if you think of a chronic disease, this is a much longer time to have a decreased quality of life if you get this disease at a much younger age. And what about diet? I think all of us can agree our diet has changed hugely in the past 50 years. We've gone away from sort of natural foods and home cooking to a massive increase in prepackaged and processed foods. And there's many things that have been driving this. It was really after the World War II and in the 50s, there was really a push to try to increase convenience for making meals at home. So it was never driven by an evil intent. It was really just an increase, a change in our lifestyle, much more longer working hours. We snack more. We snack more because we work longer hours. And all of this is usually on prepackaged food. We cook less than we ever used to cook. We eat out more in restaurants. All of our foods are, all the fats are emulsified. We don't like sugar, so we put artificial sweeteners in it. So there's huge, huge changes in our environment. And the last one I'm going to talk about is really a big one, and that is the use of antibiotics. So antibiotics were really introduced after World War II. And there is no doubt that antibiotics have changed our world, and in a very, very good way. We don't die from infectious diseases like we did prior to World War II. And think of our healthcare system, think of surgeries. We could never do what we do now without antibiotics, or premature births, protecting the baby from infection. So antibiotics have been a lifesaver, but they've had some collateral damage. And the reason is probably because they started to be prescribed more and more and more, not for need, but almost for just in case, so prophylactically. And there was a survey done in the States where they looked at and they found that 49% of family doctors, of GPs, have prescribed antibiotics just to get someone out of their office. Because the idea was they're very beneficial when you need them, but if you don't need them, they will do no harm. But they do massive harm to our microbiome. Antibiotics are like an atomic bomb to our microbiome. They don't just kill off pathogens, they kill off all of this good bacteria that you need for your health. So if we take all of these changes in our environment over the past 50 years, what has been happening is that we have been reducing the biodiversity of our microbiome. And if you think about biodiversity in our entire world, we all realize that we are reducing our biodiversity in many, many different aspects of the world. We're reducing biodiversity in our forests, in our plants, but we're also doing it on our own bodies, reducing our biodiversity. And if you look at disease now, we know that nearly every chronic disease that has been studied is associated with an alteration in the microbiome. And normally what that means is there's been a reduced biodiversity of the microbiome. So all the patients with these chronic diseases have a reduced biodiversity of their microbiome. So the good news, I think, is that we now realize that. And what we need to do now is we need to take this knowledge and build it and really understand that this microbiome is essential for our health. So let's try to harness the power of this microbiome. And what we should do is understand better the mechanisms by which all these microbial organisms shape our health, and then harness that to treat disease. So let's look at chronic diseases. Could we take the microbiome of a healthy person and give it back to somebody with chronic disease that has a reduced biodiversity and improve their health? Well, we're already doing that with fecal microbial transplantation. And in fact, this is something that's happening. We take the microbiome of a healthy individual and we give that to a patient that has an infection with a bacteria called Clostridium difficile. And in fact, just giving them back a healthy microbiome is 90% curative for those patients. So that's a huge promise because and there it's working because you're replacing this bad bacteria by a healthy microbiome. But now we're trying to use this fecal microbial transplantation in many, many other diseases, like inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes. And I think the promise is there, and the promise is huge. But I would argue that we're just doing it now as a blunt tool, just taking a mixture of some unknown, somebody that's healthy, and giving it to you. What would be much more powerful is actually if we understood what are the microbes that are beneficial for the disease that you have. And something that's been very interesting is that we now know, or there's evidence that's just recently coming out, that what microbiome you have will help to determine how well you respond to cancer therapy. So wouldn't it be fantastic if we could use precision medicine, we could analyze your microbiome and predict whether you are going to respond to your cancer medication. And if you didn't have the microbiome that led you to respond, we could harness the power of the one that did and give that back to you. So we think that by understanding the microbiome and the mechanisms and the pathways that they benefit and drive our health, we may be able to use it to treat and alter therapy in chronic disease. But what's even more exciting, I think, is what about prevention? So can we harness the power of the microbiome to prevent disease? So to do this, we obviously have to come in much earlier. To prevent disease, we have to use it prior to the onset of disease. And so to understand this, I think what's really important is that we need to understand the microbiome in early life. So a newborn baby or a fetus that is developing develops inside the mom's uterus, and this is in a protected environment. So we believe that this environment is sterile, or at least relatively sterile. We don't believe there are many microbes inside there. This baby is being allowed to develop. And then what happens is that during the birthing process itself, when the membranes rupture, the baby, which is sterile, has no microbes, is germ-free, this baby is exposed to our microbial world. And evolution and physiology has done some amazing things. During pregnancy, the mom's microbiome, probably driven through hormonal changes, we don't really know exactly all the mechanisms yet, her microbiome changes to allow those microbes to bloom and to increase that are really important to seed that newborn baby. So she increases the microbes that a newborn baby needs so that she passes those beneficial microbes on to her baby at the time of birth. And then, over those first 1,000 days of a baby's life, we believe that's really a critical window. A newborn baby is not born with a mature and developed immune system. The immune system of a newborn baby is immature, and it absolutely needs signals from the microbiome to train it and educate it to become a functioning, mature immune system that functions in a regulated way. So during those first 1,000 days, the environment is really important because the environment has a huge impact on that developing microbiome over those first 1,000 days. So diet during that time is incredibly important. So let's think of our lifestyle changes. First of all, we have now way more cesarean section born babies than we did in 1950. Many of those are required for health, and that's really good. Many of them are elective. But what's happening now is this newborn baby is not exposed to the same microbes from a cesarean section as from a natural birth. A natural birth, that baby is seeded with microbes that come from the mom's vaginal canal or from the gut. A cesarean section baby, we know, is seeded first with microbes from the skin. Those are not the microbes that should be seeding that baby first. That's not what physiology and evolution has taught us. Or even worse, it's seeded by microbes in the operating theater. And then the baby's not breastfed, or it changes the diet, has formula feeding. You're changing the diet that microbe should be, they should be developing with. So maybe you're allowing other microbes to bloom that maybe shouldn't really be there, or you're preventing those really important ones to foster. And then we have all our other lifestyle changes. Antibiotic use in early life is a very, very critical time because this is when the microbiome is still developing. We know that antibiotic use in the first in early years of life is an increased risk factor to development of allergic diseases. We also know that we can't just look at the baby from the time of birth. We have to think about the mom as well, because the mother gives the first microbes to that baby. And more than that, we now realize that it's not just that the mom passes over her microbes to her baby, so she starts that baby off in a life of health. Even in utero, even in a sterile environment, the mom's microbiota produces small molecules or metabolites, and these metabolites are captured by the mom's antibodies, and this allows them to be taken across the placenta to reach the developing fetus while it's still in a sterile environment, and it also allows these to go into the milk. And these metabolites from the mom's microbiota are very important to educate the immune system even before birth. And what that means is that that newborn baby, when it's born and it enters our microbial world, it faces its new microbes in a regulated way, and it doesn't respond with inflammation. So wouldn't that be exciting if we knew that we need to seed every baby with the right microbiota for its life? So if we can really harness the power of the microbiota to prevent disease and set every baby on a life of health, to treat disease, chronic disease, and bring them back to a more healthy state, maybe to treat, to allow our existing therapies to work even better. And that is the vision that we have here at University of Calgary in the Cummings School of Medicine, because we have taken that challenge and we said, that is our vision. We want to understand the power of the microbiome. We want to understand the molecular and cellular pathways by which the microbiome can drive health, educate our immune system, train it, and we want to be able to harness that so that we can really prevent, treat diseases, and stop this epidemic rise in chronic inflammatory diseases. Thank you.